Picture this: a father standing over his son's bed in the dead of night. The moonlight catches the blade in his hand. The boy, barely 16, stirs in his sleep, completely unaware that the man who gave him life is about to take it away. But here's the truly horrifying part. This wasn't some random murder. This was calculated, methodical, and it was just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, this man would systematically eliminate 23 members of his own family, brothers, sisters, his own mother, even his newborn grandson. 23 family members. Let that sink in for a second. That's not a killing spree. That's a family reunion turned into a graveyard. And the craziest part? He got away with it. For decades. In fact, he died peacefully in his bed at the age of 72, still wearing the crown he'd murdered his entire bloodline to keep. This is King Murad III. And while you've probably never heard his name, his story contains one of the most chilling lessons about power in human history. Because Murad didn't just kill his family out of paranoia or madness. No, this was strategic. Every single murder was a chess move. And boy, did he know how to play that game. You see, Murad realized something that most people don't understand about absolute power. It's not about being loved or even feared. It's about removing every single person who could possibly challenge you. And when your biggest threats share your last name and eat at your dinner table, well, that's when things get complicated. But how does a prince who spent his childhood writing poetry and studying philosophy become one of history's most ruthless family annihilators? How do you go from reading bedtime stories to your little brother to personally ordering his strangulation? The truth behind this story is even crazier than you think. Because Murad's killing spree wasn't just about eliminating threats. It was about creating a system so brutal, so effective, that it would keep rulers in power for the next 300 years. Little did anyone know that this poetry-loving prince would write the playbook for royal fratricide that would be followed by dictators and kings for centuries to come. Welcome to the insane true story of the king who turned family dinner into Russian roulette. Murad was born in 1546, the third son of Sultan Selim II. And that number, third, is crucial, because in the Ottoman Empire, being the third son meant you were essentially a spare part. Your oldest brother would inherit the throne, your second brother was the backup, and you were the insurance policy nobody really wanted to cash in. Murad spent his early years in what they called the cage, a luxurious prison within the palace where potential heirs were kept. Imagine being raised in a golden prison where silk cushions can't muffle the sounds of your relatives being strangled in the next room. It was an early lesson for Murad that family meant two things: blood and threat. The young prince would later reflect on those years and say something chilling. I learned to read in that cage. First books, then faces, then intentions. You see, when you grow up, knowing that your brothers might kill you the moment your father dies, you develop a very particular set of skills. Murad became a master at reading people, at understanding their motivations before they even knew them themselves. He watched his older brothers swagger around the palace, confident in their positions. He watched his younger brothers plot in corners, desperate for their chance. And Murad, he watched everyone and wrote poetry. But here's the crucial part. Those poems weren't about flowers and love. Read them today, and you'll find verses about eagles eating their young, about lions who devour their own cubs to eliminate competition. One particularly disturbing line reads, "The garden is most beautiful when pruned of excess branches, even those from the same root." He was literally writing about killing his family while they thought he was just the weird artistic brother. The truth is, every poem was a plan, every verse a strategy. When Murad was 19, something happened that changed everything. His oldest brother died suddenly, officially from illness, though whispers in the palace suggested poison. His second brother was executed a month later for treason, though the evidence was suspicious at best. Suddenly, the third son, the poet, the one nobody paid attention to, was heir to the throne. And that's when people started disappearing. But Murad saw an opportunity here that others missed. While his father Sultan Selim II drowned himself in wine, earning the nickname Selim the Drunk, Murad began building something far more intoxicating, a network of absolute loyalty. Using his poetry readings as cover, he gathered the palace's most ambitious young officials. These weren't the established nobles who had their own power bases. No, Murad recruited the hungry ones, the ones who had everything to gain and nothing to lose. He would tell them, "In my father's court, you serve. In mine, you will rule." The genius of Murad's approach was that he didn't try to compete with his father or the established power structure. Instead, he created a parallel one. While the Sultan's advisors met in the throne room, Murad's group met in the library. While official documents were being signed in Persian, Murad's people were writing new laws in Turkish. He was essentially building a government in waiting, and everyone involved knew that their fortunes were tied directly to his survival. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. By 1574, when Sultan Selim II died, falling in his bath while drunk, hitting his head on the marble, Murad's network was ready. But here's where things get dark. Murad had 5 living brothers, all with legitimate claims to the throne. The law said the oldest should rule, but Ottoman tradition was more flexible. It was really about who could seize power first. Within 6 hours of his father's death, before the body was even cold, Murad's men had locked down the palace. His brothers woke up to find their doors sealed, their guards replaced, their servants vanished. Murad didn't immediately kill them, though. That would come later. First, he needed to be crowned, to make his authority official. But even at his coronation, while crowds cheered outside, his brothers were being given a choice: pledge absolute loyalty or face the silk cord. 4 chose loyalty. They were dead within the week anyway. The 5th brother, the youngest at just 11 years old, Murad kept alive. Not out of mercy, but as a reminder to everyone else, he could kill whenever he wanted. That brother would live in terror for 3 more years before Murad finally decided he'd outlived his usefulness. But here's the crucial part of Murad's strategy that historians often miss. He didn't just kill rivals. He created a system that made rivalry impossible. What people didn't realize was that every execution followed a pattern, a methodology that Murad had been perfecting since those early days in the cage. First came the isolation. The victim would suddenly find their allies reassigned, their servants replaced, their communication cut. Then came the paranoia phase, where rumors would spread about their plots against the Sultan. By the time the silk cord came, everyone around them was almost relieved. They'd been so thoroughly character assassinated that their actual assassination seemed like mercy. Murad now had absolute power, and this is very different from what normal people understand as authority. When Murad entered a room, grown men would literally prostrate themselves, not daring to look at his face. He had a personal army of deaf-mutes as servants, chosen because they couldn't gossip about what they saw. His food was tested by 3 different tasters, his clothes were inspected for poison, his bed was checked for snakes. The paranoia that drove him to kill was now the very air he breathed. But the truly insane part was how he systematized the killing. Murad created what he called the law of fratricide, making it not just acceptable, but legally required for new sultans to kill their brothers. Think about that for a second. He turned family murder into official policy. The law stated, and I quote, "Whichever of my sons inherits the crown, it is appropriate for him to kill his brothers for the common benefit of the world order." He literally made killing your siblings a civic duty. The peak of his brutality came in 1578, when Murad discovered his sister was pregnant. Now, sisters weren't usually threats, they couldn't rule, but their sons could potentially challenge his own heirs. So Murad didn't just have his sister killed, he waited until she gave birth, let her hold the baby for exactly 1 hour, long enough to name it, to love it, and then had both mother and child strangled in front of the court. The message was clear. Blood relation was not protection. It was a liability. This wasn't just about eliminating current threats. It was about preventing future ones from ever being born. The problem was, Murad had created a system built on fear, and fear is like a drug. You need stronger and stronger doses for the same effect. But the fratricide didn't stop there. Soon, Murad was killing cousins, uncles, anyone with even a drop of royal blood. The palace became a charnel house dressed in silk. Courtiers would arrive for morning meetings to find yesterday's advisor had vanished, their position filled by someone new who knew better than to ask questions. But here's where Murad's perfect system started showing cracks. You see, when you kill everyone who might challenge you, you also kill everyone competent enough to help you rule. Murad had eliminated not just rivals but administrators, generals, anyone with the intelligence and ambition to potentially threaten him. What was left was a court of sycophants and cowards. The Ottoman Empire, which had been expanding for centuries, suddenly stopped growing. Military campaigns failed because generals were too afraid to make decisions without Murad's explicit approval. The economy stagnated because merchants feared success would make them targets. Little did Murad know, but his own paranoia was becoming his greatest enemy. He stopped sleeping, convinced assassins lurked everywhere. He would go days without eating, sure his food was poisoned. The poet, who had once written about power, had become its prisoner. And then, in 1581, something happened that even Murad hadn't planned for. He ran out of family to kill. Then, in December 1594, after 20 years of bloody rule, Murad's body finally gave out. But here's the ironic part. It wasn't poison or assassination that killed him. It was a stroke, brought on by years of paranoid insomnia and stress. The man who had spent decades protecting himself from external threats was killed by the internal pressure of maintaining his bloody throne. For Murad, as the consequences of his fratricide started to manifest in the empire's decline, he must have realized the terrible truth. He had won the game but destroyed the board. The night Murad died, the palace was in chaos. Not because people mourned him, but because nobody knew what to do. He had created such a culture of fear that even after his death, servants were afraid to enter his chamber. His body lay there for 3 days before anyone dared to check if he was actually dead. When they finally did, they found him clutching a piece of paper, one of his old poems about power and family. The ink was smeared with what looked like tears. His son, Mehmed III, inherited not just the throne, but the system his father had created. And true to the law of fratricide, Mehmed's first act as sultan was to murder his 19 brothers. 19 in a single day. The youngest was just 3 months old. As for Murad, his legacy was secured, not as the poet prince he'd once been, but as the architect of systematic family annihilation. The Ottoman Empire would practice official fratricide for another century, each generation of princes growing up, knowing they would either kill or be killed. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most weren't the princes who died. They at least died quickly. It was the mothers, forced to watch their sons kill each other, the sisters, who lived in constant fear that their children would be seen as threats. The empire itself, which gradually rotted from within as competence, was replaced by cowardice. What is clear is this system Murad created was an example of how absolute power doesn't corrupt absolutely. It consumes absolutely. Reports suggest that, towards the end, Murad had gone from a brilliant, strategic thinker to a hollow shell of paranoia. He would reportedly spend hours staring at portraits of the family members he'd killed, trying to remember why each death had been necessary. One servant claimed he would sometimes call out his brother's names in his sleep, though whether in fear or regret, nobody could say. The Ottoman Empire's practice of fratricide would officially end in 1617, but the damage was done. The empire that had once threatened to conquer all of Europe became the sick man of Europe within a century. Modern historians argue that Murad's systematic elimination of talent from the royal family created a genetic and intellectual bottleneck that the empire never recovered from. In trying to preserve his power, Murad had planted the seeds of his empire's eventual destruction. Now, whilst the story of Murad III is pretty horrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most paranoid ruler in history. For that, you're going to want to check out The absolutely insane story of Stalin's purges, where instead of killing dozens of family members, we're talking about millions of his own people, all because of a paranoia that makes Murad look trusting by comparison. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.